I've lived everywhere, man. In Texas, anyway. From Waco to Lubbock, Corpus to El Paso, Dallas to San Antonio, with Houston in between. From the defenders of the Alamo centuries ago to Medal of Honor winners of today. We don't ever want to forget the contributions our Mexican-American forefathers have made to enrich the lives of all Texans. We also want to recognize today's rising stars that are paving the way for Texas' next 200 years. May God bless Texas. This is TXMX TV. And welcome to our latest episode of TXMX TV. My name is Orlando Salazar, your host, and so glad you're here with us today. We have a tremendous guest today, one of the most interesting men in the world, in my opinion. His name is Nico LaHood from San Antonio, Texas. Welcome, Nico.
Thank you, brother. That's a wonderful introduction. I don't know, interesting man in the world, but since you said in your, I'll take that.
Oh, absolutely. At minimum, the most interesting guy in San Antonio. Yeah. So, Nico, you've had an interesting life. You have an interesting background just to start out with. You have had an interesting work life, and we're going to talk about all those things. You're a man with a lot of passion and with very strong beliefs. So we want to hear about all that and just get to know you a little bit better. So you grew up in San Antonio. Let's start there. Growing up in San Antonio, and I don't want to put words in your mouth and say you grew up in the barrio, but maybe you did. I don't know. Tell us about growing up.
All my life in San Antonio, 48 years here in San Antonio. I just turned 48 last week. 16 de septiembre, by the way. So it's
wow, awesome, bro. I didn't.
All my Latino and Hispanic friends always remember it because of the date, not because probably. But my mom grew up on the south side, and so I spent a lot of time on the south side with my grandma. My pop grew up on the west side on Morales Street here in San Antonio. He's of the Lebanese descent. My mom's Hispanic descent. And so I had a wonderful childhood. I have no complaints about that. I got to see two sides of San Antonio, underprivileged, at least monetarily, but very privileged in faith and family values, which to me, you're rich when you have the second over the first. And then, of course, we lived on another side of town growing up as well. So I feel blessed. I didn't realize how much of a blessing it was at the time growing up. But now that I look back after 48 years, it was very much a blessing growing up around my grandma.
Tell us about your last name.
LaHood. Yeah.
Describe that name. Tell us about your last name.
Well, it's Lebanese. It's of Lebanese descent. It's really spelled LAH, small h, OUD, LaHoud. So when my abuelito, in Arabic, abuelito is jiddo. So when my jiddo, my pop's pop, came over from Lebanon, he got stuck here. And they Americanized the name like they did to so many Irish and Italians and everybody else. So it became LaHood with an H. So a lot of people think it's French, they think it's Spanish, but it's of Lebanese descent, LaHoud. And so my pop is full-blooded Lebanese descent. He's the first generation born here in the States, or in San Antonio. And then my mom is Mendiola as her maiden name. She's Hispanic descent.
And you grew up in a obviously very Mexican-American influenced culture in San Antonio. You speak Spanish. You use all the Tex-Mex slang and stuff, and you feel very comfortable with the guys in the hood, so to speak. You know, no pun intended, the hood, Nico LaHood.
In the hood, yeah. I've never heard that before.
I'm sure you get that a lot. So
yes,
tell
Nico
us about that, about having that influence, having the Lebanese influence, but still having the Mexican-American influence.
But it's fascinating. I'm not completely fluent in Spanish to my detriment. I pronounce it well because I grew up hearing it. My pop speaks Spanish, and he understands Arabic and speaks English. His daddy, my jiddo, spoke 7 languages. Wow. Because before HEB and he sold fruit, and back then the Italians grew up in the Italian neighborhoods, the Germans, the Lebanese, the Mexicans, and then the Irish and all that stuff. And so he had to communicate to do business with them. So when you came from Lebanon, you spoke French fluently, Arabic, and English. Mm-hmm. When he got here, he learned Spanish, Italian, and I think I don't know what other language. There's two other languages that he could communicate in. I don't want to fill in the blanks. I have to ask my pop again. But he could communicate in 7 languages. He was fluent in 4. And so, and my mom, of course, speaks Spanish. But my pop, and I say this without being disrespectful, ignorantly told my mom, no, let them learn English first. Because back then, to talk about the culture back then, you didn't want to have an accent. Well, all 4 of my children speak Spanish and they're fluent. My wife speaks nothing but Spanish at home. And they speak perfect English, perfect Spanish. And my pop didn't know any better. He thought he was doing it for the right reason. So I speak some Spanish. I understand a lot, and I pronounce it very well. Even my suegros tell me that my pronunciation is very, very good. And so I just need to get down and practice it.
Well, look, to me, you're one of us, 100%. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Now,
I'll take it.
In looking in for information about you, it says that your dad was a judge. Was he a judge?
He was. He was a lawyer practicing. He's 83 years old. Thank God he's still with us on this side of heaven. And he was a lawyer for over 50 years now. He served on the bench here locally as a county court judge. He was a mental health magistrate judge for years before that, for 9 years before that. He served in the Army. He retired as a lieutenant colonel. And, you know, he's had an interesting life, and he's a man of honor and one of my heroes.
Wow. That's pretty special, man. I mean, that is something to look up to. Did you feel any pressure growing up with a dad that had that kind of background? I mean, how did that impact you as far as what your goals were in life and how you perceive success?
Well, he was my image bearer. He was my standard before I started walking with Christ. I grew up in a religious environment, but I wasn't relational per se. And so, you know, I wanted to be a lawyer from a very young age. I wanted to be a lawyer because I wanted to be like my pop. So, but it wasn't, you know, if I have to be real honest with you, I think I took it for granted like a lot of young people do with parents that are blessed, because you don't have a perspective when they're young, you know, Orlando. I mean, so I lost that perspective. I didn't have that perspective of exactly to appreciate my pop's experience and what he was teaching us. But now that I look back, I'm super blessed and I respect that a lot. So not really pressure. It was a standard for me that I wanted to be like my pop. I wanted to get married when he got married. I wanted to have all boys because he had all boys. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to emulate him, but I didn't feel pressure because he surely didn't put it on me.
Now, you had some bumps in the road growing up as an individual, and your family had a huge, not worse than a bump in the road, a tragedy in your family. So talk about your kind of personal issues growing up. You're having to deal with kind of your own demons, so to speak, and then what happened after that within your own family.
I deal with the social experiment called the justice system, right? Now, I didn't know it at the time, but every characteristic flaw we have, to me, is an identity issue with Christ, an identity crisis with Christ. And I was no different. I was a young, passionate guy, arrogant, and not arrogant in the definition that you might think so, but just thinking that it was about me, like many young people thought it was. I was working in bars. I never drank, but I worked in bars because I loved the attention, getting in fights. I ended up in 94 at a very young age, in my 20s, early 20s. I wasn't a child. I wasn't old enough to know better. I was arrested for selling drugs. I'm obviously not proud of that, but I'm proud of who I am today. I'll never forget my pop when he picked me up from downtown. I was more afraid of my own man than I was the system per se. And he gave me the silent treatment. You know, my pop is not as passionate or energetic as I am. He's kind of old school, laid back. And he didn't say anything to me. And I was like, man, Pop, say something. You know, yell at me, cuss me out, tell me you want me to change my last name. He was a lawyer back then. Can you imagine all the crap he had to see around there? People thinking like, hey, Mike, great job raising your kid. Got arrested for selling drugs. And he got home and he said, why'd you do it, son? I said, I don't know, Pop. I just, I wanted what you have now. I'm just stupid. And I was giving every excuse in the book. And he said, and I never forgot this. He said, don't ever forget this. It will take you years to build up a good reputation and 1 second to screw it up. And even though it didn't register with me at the time, as I've lived some life, almost 28 years later or whatever it is, 27 years later, it is true. We see that every day in politics and social and different systems. We see it takes you years to build up a good reputation and 1 second to screw it up. And so 2 years after that, on August 15th, 1996 to be exact, I was in the process of trying to turn my life around. He told me, let me tell you what my pop said. This is truly biblical what he said. He didn't reference scripture. He didn't reference, Luke 15, the prodigal son and all that stuff. But he definitely referenced a principle. He said, look, you're my son. I love you no matter what. There's nothing you can do that'll make me stop loving. And that's when he told me that it'll take you years to build up a good reputation, 1 second to screw it up. Don't make it up to me. Make it up to yourself. Now, it had to have sucked knowing that your kid got arrested for selling drugs when you're a well-known person in the justice system. But he never made me feel that way. He never told me that I had lost value to him. Big message. We devalue people in our society. My pop, even though he didn't say it, he never acted as I was devalued to him. Well, 2 years later, August 15th, 1996, at 2:14 in the morning, my older brother was coming home from being out with some friends, and there's folks following him back to the house. And there was 4 individuals that were carjacking women specifically that night. So they were following a young lady that was following Mike. They get to the house. They try to carjack them, ask for keys and wallets and things of that nature. Mike got in between her and them, and they shot him in the face in my driveway, my parents' driveway. We walked out literally 2 minutes later, 3 minutes later. I tell people, I heard my mom cry the way only a mama can cry, Orlando. You might have heard me say this before. Yes. I'm a daddy, proud to be a daddy. I have 4 children. You couldn't blink fast enough before I would give my life for any one of my kids, Papa. But you also couldn't blink fast enough before I would take a life. But there's something inherently God-givenly designed special about a mommy's relationship with her child. And I heard my mom cry that way. The words don't have a way to describe it. I ended up, after the investigation and law enforcement left, I ended up helping loading my brother's body on the gurney to take to the medical examiner's office. And then, unfortunately, I helped my pop wash my brother's blood off our driveway. And that was obviously challenging. And so I went through this journey, Orlando, of being trapped in a prison of hate. I was incarcerated in a prison of hate, and the world told me, I don't blame you. I mean, we're addicted to being victims in our society. Just look outside, you can see it. We love being victims. Go onto Facebook, go onto any social media. We try to out-victimize each other because we want the attention and we have no identity. We don't know who we are and what our purpose in life is. Why are we here? What are we here to do? What's the definition of right and wrong? All these questions have been lost. And so I went through a journey of being angry in the world telling me I don't blame you. And so you can imagine how that played out in the symptom of my life, being anger. I was angry. I was too machismo, as we say, to go get help. I didn't go get help. I didn't talk to anybody. So I self-diagnosed myself years later as a functioning angerholic. I was angry at the world.
That's an interesting word.
Yeah, I coined it myself. It just came to me. I was addicted to my anger. That became my identity, Bob. And it was interesting. And you can only go so far when you're held back by an anchor like that.
Yes.
You can't reach your God-given potential. And so there's another season in my life, another phase of this journey. And I always say it's an R-rated journey to Christ, but it was very worth it.
Well, obviously you came out of that. You made your way to St. Mary's Law School. You did become an attorney. So talk to us about your law career and then what happened next.
I started practicing law. I had stopped celebrating anything in life because I was still living in that prison of guilt of not being there for my brother when he needed me the most, but I was still accomplishing. So all the accomplishments in the world don't do anything unless you're at peace with yourself and you have that purpose. And so we started practicing law. I wanted to be, excuse my language, I wanted to be a badass trial lawyer. And so that was my mission. And so I trained and specified in that. And I got a reputation for being a trial lawyer. I would say about 13 years into practicing law, I felt the Lord put it on my heart to run for office and to run to be the district attorney of Bexar County. Many people told me I couldn't do it. I said, you can't run for office. I go, why? What's wrong? Is there some legal restriction? I can't do it. I've been practicing law for 30 years. What do you mean? I said, well, yeah, but you were arrested. And they whisper like I don't know the answer. Why you were arrested for selling drugs a long time ago. I was like, I know. Does that stop me from running for office? No. I said, okay, well then I'm going to run for office. And I ran, and the first time I ran, God had a different plan. We weren't successful. There had been a 16-year incumbent. She was the first female district attorney in Bexar County. And so I thought my tour was over. I think I showed people the story of redemption. That was a big story. And, of course, they attacked me for being a former drug dealer or whatever. And I get it. That's fine. I talked about it first. And then I thought it was done. Our practice had grown. We were doing well. I think we had 2 children, Maya and Michael. And then 4 years later, like the Lord tapped me on the shoulder. and called me off the bench, and I couldn't get away from it. So I ran again, and this time got a different plan. And so served Bexar County for 4 years.
Now, I saw some, there was a Netflix show made about that sad part of your family's life, about your brother being killed, being murdered. But within that show, they showed your career running for DA, and parts of that show showed the guys, the personalities in San Antonio that were supporting your candidacy, and you had some pretty big names supporting your candidacy. You had some San Antonio Spurs supporting you. I mean, that was pretty cool.
I met those guys, Tim and Tony, and some of the guys individually, aside from politics. And I met through mutual friends, and we just became friends early on in my legal career. I mean, so I've known Tim for 20-something years. He's godfather to Michael. And, it was a very sincere, organic relationship, friendship. It had nothing to do with politics. Back then, especially, he was non-political, for sure. And he was almost nonverbal. We used to bust his chops all the time. But, so he honored me by saying, look, I know Nico's character, and this is the person that I would support, regardless of party or anything else. And so I was very humbled by that.
Now, you say regardless of party. Talk to me about party. I mean, this is basically a nonpartisan show, but sure. You ran as a Democrat, correct?
I ran as a Christian, but I ran under the Democrat platform.
I got you.
And so
okay.
Politics, to me, if you look at the Greek, Orlando, it just means to advocate. Politico means to advocate for the affairs of the city. We're all politicians. Period. End of story. We're politicking for something, a sports group or business or sales or whatever. So we're all politics. But I ran under the Democrat platform at first because I believed that a Democrat, back then I was a blue dog Democrat. I haven't changed any of my positions on abortion or anything else or marriage. I mean, it's all been the same. But at one point you could have those very biblically based positions in that platform. And a political party is nothing more than that platform to express your worldview, to express your beliefs, and which platform lines up with what you believe. So it's really a representation of your belief system, in my humble opinion. And I've said this before, and I talked about this on radio shows before and openly talk about this. I think the Democrat Party has been hijacked. I'm not going to say what Reagan said and other people, the party left me, I didn't leave the party. No, I'm not going to buy into that. I believe it was hijacked. You're talking about an ideological shift in the party. That a blue dog Democrat, welcome. Remember, in the old days, it was a blue dog or a yellow dog. There wasn't any leftists in the Democrat Party.
Right.
Now you have to be. I don't even say liberal. I have liberal friends that I love, and they're great, and I have zero issue with a classical liberal. But that's not what the issue. That's not what's in the Democrat Party, and we misuse those terms all the time. I try to correct people. I don't offend my liberal friends by calling leftists liberals. They're leftists. It's a religion. And that leftist ideology that's sprinkled in with Marxism and socialism, as we've seen lately, has hijacked the Democrat Party, unfortunately. And so I didn't change one position that I've ever had, from the first time I ran to the second time I ran to how I served in office. So I very publicly walked away from the Democrat Party.
Well, what would you say was your highlight as the district attorney in San Antonio? What one or two things that would say marked your career as the DA?
I humbly think the culture. People enjoyed going to work. They were purpose driven. They knew. You can see behind me. Oh, sorry, this side on your pic. It said, "Do what's right, not what's easy." That was in my office as you left my office at the DA's office. Always do what's right, not what's easy. I don't care about political backlash. If you're doing what is ethical and legal, and to me moral, well then I'll back you up and I'll stand in front of you. And I showed that over and over again in the office. And so do what's right. And people, I think I gave them the autonomy. You can't micromanage 500 people, Orlando. We had 200 lawyers and 300 support staff. I mean, you can't micromanage that, nor should I want to. Can't be efficient that way. So I want to say the culture, number one. I think people were purpose driven. We were fearless in the sense that if we're going to stand for truth. I was not politically correct, and I always tell people that I was a crappy politician, but I think I was a pretty damn good statesman. And so that was it. Number one is the culture. Number two is that case that a lot of people in Texas knew about, Janine Jones. It was a 30-year-old murder case that 2 DAs before me said we couldn't do anything about. She is suspected in murdering 30 infants, many of them in their mommy's arms.
Oh my God!
And she had been convicted. If you look up Janine Jones, she was called the Angel of Death by the media back then. And so she was serving a sentence, under the old law, life sentence, but she was going to parole out in April, I think it was March, sorry, of 2018. And I made a promise when I was running for office that we would look into those cases and humbly, and we have great lawyers, Jason Goss, who works with me at the office. All the guys here were former prosecutors with me in the office. He led the case. I signed into the case, and we had 5 new indictments on her, and that woman will meet the Lord from prison, which she should. And so we got 5 new indictments that no one said we could get. So that was a legal accomplishment. But then I started a conviction integrity unit, which was only the 9th in the country, 3rd in the state. We started a restorative justice peace model, and we did a lot of different programs where people that were nonviolent were given opportunities to turn their life around, like I had. But then the violent people, the people that we're scared of, we need to get them out of the community. The people that piss us off, so to speak, or make us angry, how can we help them turn their life around so they can be productive members of society? And so that was kind of the culture. I don't want to give you a laundry list of all the things we did. We did a lot of individual programs that will be a lot of legal jargon to you, but those I think are the highlights. But there's a lot more.
Well, you squeezed a lot into 4 years, man. Way to go.
Well, I didn't do it by myself. We squeezed it into
Good
4
team.
years. I couldn't have done it.
Yeah.
I was just the guy that was foolish enough to put his name on the plaque, you know. But I had phenomenal people that I worked with every day, and I always tried to elevate them and give them honor where honor is due, and brag about everybody else.
Well, now you have a family. You have a private practice again. Tell me about your kids. Tell me about your beautiful wife.
Yeah. No, you met her, Orlando. I married up, and you agree with me.
Well, didn't we all?
Yeah, no, Pobrecita, she married down, but I married up, and she's a joy, and I'm honored to be her husband. And then we have 4 children: Maya, Michael, Leah, and Zaiter. Zaiter was named after my grandpa. That's him on my lap right there. Zaiter is a very traditional Lebanese name, and Zaiter, Zaiter, Zaiter. And so my aunt cried when she found out we named him after my grandpa. And those are my delight. My kids, those are my world. Christ, and then my family.
Well, I know that you're a man of faith. I mean, it's been obvious through this whole interview. You talk about your faith. So you're very involved with your church. Talk to us about your faith.
Yeah, no, well, look, I always tell people the worst advice we were given growing up, Orlando, is the 2 things you don't talk about is what? Religion and politics, right? What horrible advice. Religion to me is your worldview. Politics is what you're advocating. Okay, I'm gonna try to break it down a little bit. So if I'm supposed to live at peace with my neighbor, how can I not talk about my worldview and what I'm advocating for? We have to. And I think it's horrible. And we're seeing the results of a society that was raised not to talk about worldview and advocacy. And so I believe in the Judeo-Christian worldview. I have a biblical worldview. That means every position I have goes through the lens of the Bible, and I can defend it. From science to everything else. I mean, I think the church, humbly, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I think the church has handed over a lot of topics to the secular world. And we're seeing it in the data about young people that don't believe in a biblical worldview. It's very alarming to me. And I'm just real practical. You know that. I talk real raw sometimes, and I'm respecting your platform here. I do prison ministry, Orlando. I've done halfway houses. I talk to young people. I talk to at-risk kids, and I never label them that. I'm just telling you what society does. And I want to give them hope. And the only answer to every societal ailment is a first century Jew named Jesus Christ. That he's a historical figure. I've studied the life of Jesus Christ when I was going through my storm and when I was stuck in the prison of hatred. And I looked at it like a case that I look at evidence. I studied the most famous murder scene in the history of mankind, which was the murder of that first century Jew, Jesus Christ. And so I studied that murder scene, his crucifixion, and I was persuaded by the evidence that I saw. And so now that I said, okay, I knew I grew up religious, but I didn't grow up in a relationship. What do I do with this information now? It affects everything. It affects marriage. It affects life. It affects profession. It affects being a daddy. It affects enemies. It affects trials and tribulations. It affects everything. And so I'm persuaded by the evidence.
Well, we appreciate you being on the show today, Nico. I know that you have aspirations. You know what? My introduction talks about our heroes of the past and rising stars, and I think you're kind of a combination. I think you've done some great things already, but I think your star is still rising. So, what's next? What do you think is out there for you?
I thank Orlando. I'm humbled by that. I mean that sincerely because your opinion matters to me, brother. When we met, I knew that we were kindred spirits and that we both serve the same God and we have same family values and traditional values of our ethnic backgrounds and things of this nature. But thank you for that. Look, I've been working on obedience for the last many years. I really don't try to overthink things. We need to be deliberate about life. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that you don't plan and you don't try to achieve something, but I always try to make sure that I'm obedient. And so right now, January will be 2 years since I've been out of the office, and my family's enjoyed having me back. My kids, I worked 6, 7 days a week. It took me 3 months to figure out what to do on weekends. I was always working
Yeah.
and talking. And so I've enjoyed this season, Orlando. I really have enjoyed this season. But so I'm doing a lot of ministry, that through podcasts and different talks that I do. I really want to convince people about the worldview that I believe is the most credible one, which is the biblical worldview. So I'll be obedient. I do have that desire to be in office again, even though politics is not conducive for good people. Hear me. This is the irony. Politics is not conducive for good people, but we need good people in politics.
Yeah.
And people are dissuaded by it because there's a bunch of backstabbing, fake ass people in there. But that's so be it. Jesus was around a bunch of them himself, namely Judas, right? So you just go with courage and you make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons and humility, but fearlessness at the same time. That's a hard balance, and it's impossible in the flesh, in my humble opinion. And I speak the truth, and I'll always conform to the truth and humble myself, but I will always champion the truth. And so I'm kind of open. I'll wait for the Lord to give me the green light, and He usually do it through Davi. She gave me the green light before. I wouldn't have run without her permission and support. So
you
I wouldn't
do
do
what
anything
Mama
without
says, or Lord, and then Mama.
Yeah, I always tell my daughter, we teach on biblical marriages, and people always freak out over Ephesians 5 and submission and all that stuff. So I asked Maya one day,
Well, I'm gonna ask you to hang on a little bit, and Sarah, I'm gonna ask you to hold off on this because usually I do a Via con Dios segment on my own, but I'm gonna ask you to do it with me today, Nico, because I want you to be a part of this. But in the meantime, as you're watching the show, if there's some idea or person that you think would be great to have on TXMX TV, there'll be an email address at the bottom of the screen. And if there's somebody you think would be a great guest for us on TXMX TV, we invite you to please send in your suggestions, and we'd love to have your input. And we do finish every show with a Via con Dios segment. And Nico, since you probably Scripture way 100 times better than I do, I'm going to throw something out, and then I'm going to get you to comment on it for me because of everything you've gone through. No pressure. It's just Philippians 4:13. What does it say?
I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But Philippians 4:11 is just as important. What Paul is saying to the Philippi, read Philippians 4:11. He says, "I've learned to be content in all circumstances."
That's right.
And then it leads up to, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." And so, God is not Grandpa God; He's Daddy God. He cares about our maturity more than our comfort and our happiness. He cares about the joy and the peace that comes through a relationship with Him in this broken world, knowing that it's worth it once we are called off this earth. Now, He wants us to be blessed, and He wants us to have an abundant life, no doubt about that, but He also tells us that tribulation's coming. James 1:2-4, Romans 5:3-5, 2 Corinthians 4:17-18. It's very clear, John 16:33, very clear that tribulation's coming, but have heart, have hope. God has overcome the world, and it's worth it. So I'm not playing short ball, Orlando. You know that. You've heard me say this before. God, if the Lord leaves me on this earth for 90 years, 95 years, si Dios quiere, I'm not playing for that. I'm playing for eternity, and that motivates everything that I do.
Well, and to kind of tag on to that, and you can help wrap us up in just a minute or two, but also Romans 8, he says we're more than conquerors. And so
in Christ Jesus.
That's right. And nothing can separate us from the love of God, right, Nico?
Romans 8. But in between that, Orlando, is Romans 8:28, that God works all things out for the good of those who love Him, are called by His purpose. So that's relational and obedience. And that's what I've worked on for over 15 years now.
Well, Nico, thank you so much for joining us. You're an awesome man, and you have an awesome family. You've done so much already for your community, for all of us here in Texas, and we can't wait to see what comes next. So thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm humbled, brother. God bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for being with us on this episode of TXMX TV, and we'll see you again on the next show. Thank you.